In 2023, a retired pilot in Florida received an old envelope. Inside was a faded flight log from 1948. The log listed a flight from New York to Chicago. It never landed. The pilot had never heard of it. The log ended mid-page with 3 words. "They're here." He felt a chill. Why did this log end like that? And why had it been mailed to him? His name wasn't even on the original crew list. He decided to find answers. The first stop, the Federal Aviation Administration archives in Washington, D.C., but when he arrived, he found something disturbing. The flight number didn't exist in any official records. Still, a clerk whispered that old pilots used to call it the vanishing run. The pilot knew he was stepping into a dangerous story. A story someone had tried to bury for 75 years. At a small diner in D.C., an elderly mechanic approached him. "You're asking about Flight 261?" the man asked quietly. The pilot nodded. The mechanic shook his head. "Stop digging. Those skies don't forgive." The pilot pressed for details. The mechanic finally spoke. They took off in perfect weather. Radio silence came 10 minutes later. 3 days later, wreckage washed ashore in Delaware. But the cockpit was missing, and so were the pilots. The pilot felt the air grow heavy. "What happened to them?" he asked. The mechanic's eyes darted to the door. They saw something they shouldn't have, and it saw them back. The man walked away without another word. The pilot realized this wasn't just about a lost plane. This was about something or someone that didn't want to be found. The pilot booked a cheap motel room near D.C. He called an old friend, a former NTSB investigator. When he mentioned Flight 261, there was a long pause. "I've seen that case file," the investigator said, "but it's classified under a different name." "You won't find it in public records?" The pilot asked for details. "All I can say," the voice lowered, "is that the wreckage showed no signs of impact. It looked like the plane was taken apart in the air." The pilot sat in silence. Planes don't just come apart without reason. The investigator ended the call with a final warning. "Whatever you think you're chasing, it's been chasing back for decades." The pilot looked out the motel window. A black sedan sat across the street. It had been there since morning. The next day, the pilot headed for the Library of Congress Aviation Archives. He barely stepped inside before a tall man in a gray suit approached him. "You need to leave," the man said firmly. "Flight 261 is not your concern." The pilot asked who he was. "Let's just say I work for people who keep the skies safe." The man's tone wasn't threatening, but his eyes were cold. He handed the pilot a folded note and walked away. The note read, "Last chance. Stop." The pilot crumpled it. Whoever these people were, they didn't want the truth out. But the more they pushed him away, the more he wanted to know. He made a decision. He would find the last living passenger's family. The last living passenger had died in 1995, but his daughter still lived in Ohio. The pilot drove 12 hours straight to her small house outside Cleveland. She opened the door cautiously. "You're here about my father's flight," she said before he could speak. He nodded. She led him inside and pulled out a metal box. Inside were photos, letters, and a torn piece of an airline safety card. "My father never talked about it," she said. "But he told my mother once they saw lights in the clouds that moved faster than the plane." The pilot studied the safety card. It had strange burn marks, circular and perfectly even. Before he could ask more, she warned him. "2 men came here years ago. They took most of my father's things. If they find out you've been here, you'll disappear too." The pilot checked into a roadside motel and examined the safety card under a desk lamp. The burn marks weren't normal. No smoke damage, no charring, just clean holes in the material. He called a friend who worked at a materials lab in Chicago. When he described it, his friend went silent. "That's not from fire," the friend finally said. "It is from high-intensity energy, the kind we don't have in commercial aviation." The pilot's mind raced. If the damage wasn't from the crash, then it happened before the plane went down. And if the energy source wasn't human, a knock on the motel door interrupted his thoughts. He froze. When he opened it, no one was there, just a manila envelope on the ground. Inside was a photo of the 1948 wreckage. Across the bottom, someone had written in red ink, "It's happening again." The pilot drove through the night back to Florida. On the way, news broke on the radio. A passenger jet flying from Dallas to Atlanta had vanished from radar for 12 minutes. When it reappeared, it was off course by 50 miles. The airline blamed instrument malfunction, but the pilot knew better. He called his old investigator friend. "They're calling it Flight 94, the friend said. "Guess what? Same airline as Flight 261 back in 1948. The pilot felt his stomach drop. This wasn't history repeating, it was history continuing. The friend warned him not to dig further. The pilot ignored him. He booked a ticket on Flight 94's next scheduled route. On the day of the flight, the pilot boarded like any other passenger. He carried only a small bag and the burned safety card. The plane took off smoothly. At cruising altitude, he checked his watch. Based on the last incident, the disappearance window was near the halfway point. The seatbelt sign turned on, the lights flickered. Outside the window, clouds swirled in unnatural patterns. The engines grew quieter, almost too quiet. The pilot glanced at the flight attendants. They were frozen in place, staring ahead as if in a trance. His watch stopped ticking. Then, just as suddenly, the lights came back, the engines roared, and the plane continued as if nothing happened. The captain made no announcement, but the pilot knew something had been in the sky with them. When the plane landed in Atlanta, the pilot waited until most passengers left. He approached one of the flight attendants. "What happened up there?" he asked quietly. She avoided his eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about." Her voice was flat, rehearsed. The captain walked past them, gave the pilot a brief look, and kept moving. At baggage claim, a man in a gray suit, the same one from DC, appeared. "You really don't listen, do you?" he said. The pilot stepped closer. "Whatever's in those skies, it's still out there, and it's still taking planes." The man's jaw tightened. "Go home before you end up like them." Then he walked away, disappearing into the crowd. The metal around the cockpit had the same perfect burn marks as the old safety card. But there was something else, a thin layer of a dark glass-like substance along the edges. He reached to touch it, but a voice echoed in the hangar. "Step away from that plane." The sound of footsteps followed. The pilot turned slowly. Two men in black jackets walked toward him, both wearing earpieces. One of them carried a clipboard, the other a holstered weapon. "This is restricted federal property," the man with the weapon said. "You have no idea what you're touching." The pilot stayed calm. "I know enough. Planes vanish, reappear, and no one tells the truth. It started in 1948, and it's still happening." The man with the clipboard stepped closer. "It didn't start in 1948. That was just the first time we lost control of it." The pilot's pulse quickened. "What is it?" he asked. Neither man answered. Instead, they escorted him outside, shoved him toward the fence, and warned, "Next time you won't walk away." Before leaving, the man with the clipboard whispered, "Check the weather logs from both flights. The truth is in the storms." Back in his motel room, the pilot logged into an old meteorology database using credentials he still had from his flying days. He compared the weather on the night of the 1948 crash to the day of Flight 94, as 12-minute disappearance. A pattern emerged, same cloud formation, same pressure drop, same lightning anomaly, but the strangest part? Both incidents happened along a nearly identical flight path. He traced the path on a map. The line crossed over a remote stretch of Appalachian Mountains in West Virginia. No major cities. No air bases. Just dense forest. If something was up there, it was hiding in plain sight. And the pilot knew exactly where he had to go next. The pilot rented a small twin-engine plane from a private strip in Virginia. No flight plan, no radio chatter. Just him, a handheld GPS, and enough fuel for 4 hours. He climbed into the clouds, following the exact route from the map. The further he flew, the darker the sky became. Lightning flickered inside the clouds, but there was no thunder. Then his GPS froze. Every compass dial spun slowly, as if searching for a direction that didn't exist. The engines coughed, then steadied. A shadow passed under the plane, huge, fast, and silent. His heart pounded. It wasn't another aircraft. It was something else, moving just below the clouds, matching his speed. The radio crackled with a voice he didn't recognize. "You should not have come here." The plane jolted sideways as if an invisible hand had grabbed it, the nose tilted down toward the mountains. He felt the controls, but they were stiff, unresponsive. Outside, the clouds glowed faintly, forming a perfect circle beneath him. The shadow below rose toward him, its edges shimmering like heat on asphalt. His ears popped violently, and a deep hum filled the cockpit. Warning lights flashed red across the panel. Then, through the glow, he saw shapes, twisted metal, fragments of old fuselages, drifting upward like leaves in a current. They weren't just from one plane, they were from decades of planes. Something here was collecting them, and now it was pulling him in too. The cockpit filled with blinding white. The controls went dead. The hum became so loud it vibrated in his bones. Then silence. He opened his eyes. The plane was suspended in a vast, dim space, like the inside of a storm cloud frozen in time. Floating all around were aircraft, some modern, some so old, they still had propellers. Their windows were dark, their engines lifeless. He realized these were the vanished flights, all of them. Something moved in the fog, massive, shifting, its outline impossible to focus on. A voice, not through the radio, but inside his head, said, "You found us." He didn't answer. "You will stay here now, like the others?" He refused to give up. Reaching under his seat, he grabbed the emergency flare pistol he'd brought for survival landings. He fired straight into the glowing mist. The entire space shuddered. The hum broke into chaotic static. The pull on his plane loosened. Without thinking, he slammed the throttle forward. The engines roared back to life, and the light began collapsing around him. Through the narrowing gap ahead, he saw open sky. One last push, the plane shot through, and he was back in a storm, rain hammering the windshield. He didn't look back. Hours later, he landed at a deserted rural airstrip. The plane was smoking, dented, but intact. He staggered out, heart still pounding. In the cockpit, he retrieved the flight data recorder, a black box. If it had captured even a fraction of what happened, it would prove everything. But as he pulled it out, he saw something carved into its side. A date, October 25th, 48, the same day Flight 261 vanished. The device wasn't new, it had been here before, and somehow it had come back with him. He looked up at the night sky. The clouds were moving in circles again,